Hello there, it's me Bamdev Poudyal with a new video here. First of all, welcome to you all to my YouTube channel Bachelor and Master English. I've been taking the topics from the history of English literature. Today, I'm talking about the big six of English romantic poetry. As the topic sounds, it cannot be discussed in one short video discussion. So I have attempted to divide this topic into three lectures. In the first lecture, I dealt with predecessors and forerunners of romantic poetry of English, along with my discussion on William Blake. As it is the second lecture today, I shall be discussing two giant figures of English romantic poetry. They are William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The last or third lecture shall be on younger romanticists. They are Byron, Shelley and Keats. I'm sure you'll accompany me listening and watching till the end of today's discussion. Please don't forget to share, comment and like this video. For more updates from Bachelor and Master English, kindly subscribe to my channel. Let's begin today's discussion on Big Six of English Romantic Poetry, second lecture. I'm talking about William Wordsworth first. Wordsworth is a pioneer of English Romanticism. He is best known as the poet who reawakened his readers to the beauty of nature, describing the emotions, perceptive insights which natural beauty arouses in the sensitive observer. He advocated a poetry of simple feeling and the use of the language of ordinary speech, demonstrated in the unadorned simplicity of lyrics such as "To the Cuckoo" and "I Wander Lonely as a Cloud." William Wordsworth was born in Cockermouth, Cumberland in the north of England's Lake District and was educated at St. John's College, Cambridge. A walking tour of Europe in his early 20s brought him into contact with the first throes of French Revolution, whose deals he supported until the onset of the Terror. Upon his return to England, he settled with his sister Dorothy in the Lake District, where, apart from some few brief travels, he remained for the rest of his life. His celebration of nature and the beauty of poetry in the commonplace embody a unified and coherent vision that was profoundly innovative. He had enthusiasm for the brotherhood of mankind. William Wordsworth was one of the founders of English Romanticism and one of the central figures and important intellects. He is remembered as a poet concerned with the human relationship to nature and a fierce advocate of using the vocabulary and speech patterns of common people in poetry. In 1795, he met poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, with whom he collaborated on publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1790, which included Tintern Abbey, a meditation on his response to nature. His friendship with Coleridge was the most significant event in his life. They both ushered a new trend in poetry, stressing the need for a return to nature and simpler and more varied mode of poetic communication. Their joint venture, Lyrical Ballads, is one of the most important and innovative works in the history of English literature. The publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798 came as a shock, as critics considered the language too simple and change too violent. Wordsworth was a poet of nature, and he had a special ability to throw a charm over ordinary things. Coleridge, on the other hand, could make mysterious events acceptable to a reader's mind. Neither of them used the old language of poetry much. Wordsworth was so filled with love of nature that in the latter editions of the Lyrical Ballads, published in 1800 and 1802 respectively, he said that language of poetry ought to be the same as the language of the simple farm worker. Yet, he could not keep to this idea himself. His imagination led him far beyond the life and thoughts of countrymen. The main stream of poetry in the 18th century had been orderly and polished, without much feeling for nature. Heroic couplets were used for this verse, but various writers and poets had broken away from the form and thought. In his preface to the second edition, published in 1800, in his preface to the second edition of the Lyrical Ballads, published in 1800, Wordsworth attacks on poetic diction and elaborate figures of speech, characteristic of 18th century poetry, asserting that he had taken much of pains to avoid it as others take to produce it, and advocating the language really used by men. I wander lonely as a cloud, London, 1802, Tinton Abbey, my heart lifts up when I behold, a slumber did my spirit still, ode, intimations of immortality, the solitary reaper, surprised by joy, impassioned as the wind, etc., are some of the best among the others that Wordsworth composed in his lifetime. His most notable individual poems were published in Poems in 1807, including Intimations of Immortality. At intervals between then and 1839, he revised the Prelude, posthumously published in 1850. The first part of his uncompleted philosophical, creative, and spiritual autobiography in verse. He was appointed Poet Laureate in 1843. Four remarkable characteristics of Wordsworth poetry. Number one, Wordsworth is sensitive as a barometer to every subtle change in the world about him. Number two, of all the poets who have written of nature, there is none that compares with him in the truthfulness of his representation. Wordsworth gives you the bird and flower, the wind and the tree and the river as they are, and is content to let them speak their own message. Number three, no other poet ever found such abundant beauty in the common world. He had not only sight but insight. Number four, it is the life of nature which is everywhere recognized, not mere growth and cell changes, but sentient personal life, and the recognition of this personality in nature characterizes the entire world's great poetry. Okay, up to now I talked about William Wordsworth, but Wordsworth's discussion alone like this cannot be complete unless we discuss his contribution and his works, his innovation and his publication and his let's say literary partnership together with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So let me talk about Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his contribution in the revolution of English poetry that was brought with the publication of the Lyrical Ballads. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. British author Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a poet, philosopher, and literary critic whose writings have been enormously influential in the development of modern thought. In his lifetime, Coleridge was renowned throughout Britain and Europe as one of the Lake Poets, a close-knit group of writers including William Wordsworth and Robert Southey, together with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the three persons together. Today, Coleridge is considered the premier poet critic of modern English tradition, distinguished for the scope and influence of his thinking about literature as much as for his innovative verse. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, born in Devon in 1772, his father, a clergyman, moved his family to London when Coleridge was young, and it was there that Coleridge attended school. As he would later recall in poems such as Frost at Midnight, he later attended Cambridge but left without completing his studies. Coleridge married Sarah Flicker in 1794, from whom he afterwards separated. The very year he became friends with Robert Southey. The following year, Coleridge met William Wordsworth and Wordsworth's sister Dorothy Wordsworth in Somerset. It turned out to be a very important event in the history of English literature. During the politically charged atmosphere of the late 18th century, the French Revolution had set shock waves through Europe, and England and France were at war. Coleridge made a name for himself both as political radical as an important young poet. Along with his friends Robert Southey and William Wordsworth, he became one of the most important writers in England. It was one of the most creative periods of his life, inspiring the composition of poems such as Kubla Khan, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and Christabel. With Wordsworth, he collaborated on the highly influential collection and published Lyrical Ballads Lyrical Ballads in 1798. One of the most revolutionary collection of poetry in the history of English literature. It was a landmark of romantic poetry which expressed their theory of poetic sensation and was the spearhead of English Romanticism. The idea of poetry underlying lyrical ballads turned the established convention of poetry upside down, privileging natural speech over poetic ornament, simply studied themes over elaborate symbolism, emotions over abstract thought, and the experience of natural beauty over urban sophistication. The book paved the way for two generations of poets and stands as one of the milestones of European literature. Coleridge's poetry is charged with romantic imagery, but his attitude towards life was moral and spiritual as that of his great contemporary Wordsworth. Insofar as Wordsworth was a poet of nature, the purity of childhood and memory, Coleridge became the poet of imagination, exploring the relationships between nature and the mind as it exists as a separate entity. Poems such as The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Kubla Khan demonstrate Coleridge's talent for concocting bizarre, unsettling stories full of fantastic imagery and magic. In poems such as Frost at Midnight and Dejection and Word, he muses explicitly on the nature of mind as it interacts with the creative source of nature. This poem eloquently expresses his sense of frustration and waste, his opium consumption increased, and by 1803 he was restless and miserable and did little work. In 1804, he traveled to Malta, where he became a secretary to the governor for 10 months, going on to Naples and Rome before returning to England in 1806. He arrived home miserably broken in mind and body, and moved from place to place. Estranged from his wife, he was sometimes alone, sometimes with his family. From 1808 to 1819, and that is the period of 11 years, he gave a series of lectures on prose and drama, and from 1816 lived in Highgate, London, under medical care. Here he produced his major prose work, Biographia Literaria, in 1817, a collection of autobiographical pieces in which he develops his philosophical and critical ideas. In the works of Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Robert Southey, we find in the nude romanticist a celebration of the omnipresence of God in nature. They had discovered a sacred shrine for worship not only in the vastness of mountains, forests, and seas, but in the smaller intimacies of birds hopping on branches and in the meanest flower that blows. In an age dominated by skepticism and empiricism, Coleridge held fast to his belief in the powers of the imagination, which he saw as capable of leading humanity to death through appeals not to reason but to the senses. If Wordsworth determined the content of century or more of English poetry, Coleridge determined itself. His theories on organic form provided basis for the development of a freer poetic and may have been the progenitor of many 20th century experiments in free verse. Though Wordsworth is the greatest exponent of this feeling for the sacredness of nature, the idea originated with Coleridge. These two young men formed a literary partnership in poetry similar to that of Addison and Steele in prose. During their 20s, while taking long walks in the rolling Somerset hills, they discussed poetry and finally evolved the idea of writing together a volume according to their different talents. Coleridge was to contribute poems of supernatural incidents describing dramatically the emotions that would accompany such situations. Wordsworth's part was to be poems of ordinary life, treating of characters and incidents found in every village and vicinity. This was the origin of the Lyrical Ballads of 1798, which launched the Romantic movement in not only English literature but literature of the world. In literature, the Lyrical Ballads of Wordsworth and Coleridge brought new emphasis to poetry, especially the spiritual interpretation of nature, the emotions of the common man, and the spell of the supernatural. The mood of Romanticism prepared the country for a remarkable outburst of poetry, with prose somewhat overshadowed. Sir Walter Scott made a reputation in both fields. Young romanticists Byron, Shelley, and Keats, during their short lives, produced poetry excelling in lyric beauty, which I'll be talking in later in my third lecture of this chapter on the big six of English romantic poetry. The younger romantics held him in great esteem, and his reputation was further enhanced by Christabel and other poems published in 1814. An edition of his collected poems which appeared in 1817 and 1828 and 1834. The works of Coleridge naturally divide themselves into three classes: the poetic, the critical, and the philosophical, corresponding to the early, the middle, and the latter periods of his career. His early poems show the influence of Gray and Blake, especially of the latter, that is William Blake. Okay, that's the end of my discussion here. Up to now, you have been listening and watching the lecture on Big Six of English Romantic Poetry. In today's lesson, I discussed about two giant pillars of English Romantic poetry, that is William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. If you enjoyed it, please give a like to this video. If you have some queries, put your words in the comment box. I wouldn't mind you subscribing the channel for more updates on literature courses for bachelor and master levels, along with exciting pieces of translated version for connoisseurs of literature, world literature especially. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention.